Have you ever noticed how some people can simply say, no thanks, and leave it there? Meanwhile, some of us respond like we're presenting evidence to a panel of investigators. Well, it's just that I've had a really busy week and I'm also quite tired. And I did say yes last time. And I don't want you to think I don't care, because I do care. And suddenly what should have been a two-word answer has become a full emotional documentary. And for caring, thoughtful and emotionally aware people, over-explaining can become exhausting. Because it's not usually about communication. It's about protection. Protection from guilt. Protection from conflict. From disappointing people. From being misunderstood. And when we spend our lives trying to make absolutely sure that everybody else is comfortable with us, we can slowly stop feeling comfortable within ourselves. So today I want to focus on why caring people often over-explain, why it drains so much emotional energy, and how to begin speaking with more calmness, confidence, clarity, and self-trust. Hi, I'm Dave and welcome to Dave's Mindcraft, the space especially for caring and overwhelmed people who want to calm their minds, overcome self-doubt and build lasting self-esteem and resilience. And I want to explore something that quietly exhausts a lot of caring people. The habit of over-explaining. The habit of justifying ourselves. And the habit of feeling that we have to defend every decision, every boundary and every no. Because what if over-explaining isn't helping people understand you better? What if it's actually leaving you feeling more anxious? Maybe more drained and less connected to your own voice? And what if there was a calmer way, a way of speaking with more confidence, more clarity and more self-trust? And if you're someone who constantly feels the need to explain yourself, justify yourself, and soften everything you say, or make sure everyone else is okay with your decisions, then firstly, you are definitely not alone. And secondly, there's probably a very understandable reason why. And one of the biggest misunderstandings about over-explaining is that people assume it's simply a communication habit, but often it's actually an emotional safety strategy. Because somewhere along the way, many caring people learned that being understood felt safer than being judged. So we explain, and explain, and explain again. Not necessarily because the other person asked us to, but because internally our nervous system is trying to prevent discomfort. And this can happen in all sorts of ways. You cancel plans and immediately panic that someone else thinks you're rude. You set a boundary and then spend 3 hours mentally rewriting a message. You say no, but then feel the need to provide a detailed explanation. 3 examples, supporting evidence, and possibly a signed note from your doctor. And honestly, sometimes we can become so worried about disappointing other people that we accidentally abandon ourselves in the process. Now, very often, over-explaining is connected to a deeper emotional fear. A fear of being misunderstood, maybe a fear of being disliked or being rejected, or being seen as selfish or upsetting people. And for caring people, these fears can feel incredibly uncomfortable, because many caring people aren't just trying to communicate, they're trying to maintain emotional harmony. They're trying to keep everyone okay. But here's something important to understand. You can be kind without constantly defending yourself. You can be thoughtful without over-justifying your existence. And you can disappoint someone occasionally without becoming a bad person. And that's an important shift. Because sometimes people misunderstand. People project. People react emotionally. People hear things through their own stress, their history, or their expectations. And that doesn't automatically mean you communicated badly. Sometimes you simply communicated honestly, and there's a difference. And I know this because I've done it myself. For many years, if somebody asked me a question, or I needed to say yes, or I needed to say no, I often felt a strong need to explain my thinking. I wanted people to understand where I was coming from. I wanted to be fair, and I wanted to be clear. And honestly, I probably wanted to make sure that nobody thought badly of me as well. But over time, I noticed something interesting. The more I explained, the less clear my message sometimes became. I would start with a simple answer, and then I'd add another explanation, and then another, and before long the original point had almost disappeared underneath all the extra detail. And ironically, the very thing I was trying to achieve, which was being understood, sometimes became harder to achieve because the other person wasn't always hearing the simple message anymore. They were trying to navigate all the additional information I'd added around it. And that was a really important lesson for me. And I quickly began to realise that clarity often means keeping it simple, and that sometimes the kindest thing we can do both for ourselves and the other person is communicate clearly, honestly and briefly, because a clear answer is often easier to understand than an over-explained one. And as the old saying goes, if you can't make it simple, you probably don't understand it well enough yourself. And whilst that isn't true in every situation, there is wisdom in remembering that more words do not always create more understanding. Sometimes they create more confusion. And confession time, I still catch myself doing this occasionally. Old habits have a funny way of sneaking back in from time to time with me. And I sometimes hear myself halfway through an explanation and think, Dave, you've answered a question 3 minutes ago, and that usually makes me smile. But that's okay, because I'm a work in progress just like everybody else. The goal isn't perfection, the goal is awareness, because once we become aware of something, we have the opportunity to gently change it. And I think that's true for all of us. And something I've tried to do over the years is give myself permission to use what I call the one sentence rule. And if somebody asks me a question, or I need to say yes or I need to say no as a response, I try to answer it in one sentence first. Just one. Not because I'm being rude and not because I don't care, but because I've learned that clarity often comes before explanation. And if the other person genuinely needs more information, they'll usually ask for it. And that simple shift has helped me enormously, because I've discovered that not every answer requires a commentary track. And perhaps that's a little piece of wisdom for us all to remember, that clarity doesn't usually come from adding more words. It often comes from choosing better ones. And one of the reasons over-explaining becomes so draining is because it creates a life that where you're constantly trying to manage what everybody else thinks about you then becomes exhausting. Because no matter how carefully you explain yourself, you still can't fully control how another person interprets you. And that can feel deeply uncomfortable for people who are naturally caring and conscientious. Sometimes we think, if I just explain myself properly, then nobody will be upset. But life doesn't always work like that. And that's a difficult lesson to learn, because some people will misunderstand us, no matter how carefully we choose our words. Some people will disagree with us. Some people will see things differently, and that's part of being human. The goal is not to make everybody understand. The goal is to communicate honestly and then let go of what was never ours to control. And honestly, some caring people could turn "Sorry I can't make it tonight" into a 7-part Netflix series. Episode 1, The Build-Up. Episode 2, Reasons Why I'm Actually Still a Nice Person. Episode 3, Please Don't Be Cross with Me. And by episode 7, you're emotionally exhausted. So, holding your phone like it contains nuclear launch codes is part of that too. And waiting for somebody to reply simply, "No worries." And the strange thing is, most people probably weren't analysing you anywhere near as much as you were analysing yourself. And that's important to remember, because overthinkers often assume everyone else is studying them closely, when actually most people are just trying to remember where they put their car keys. Now, this doesn't mean becoming cold, sharp, or uncaring. That's not what we're aiming for here. We're aiming for calm clarity. And calm clarity sounds like, "No thank you, I'm not available today. I need some rest." That doesn't work for me. And then allowing that sentence to exist without immediately trying to rescue everybody's emotional reaction. And that part takes practice, especially if your nervous system has learned that conflict feels unsafe. But the more you practice calm honesty, the more your brain slowly learns, I can survive this discomfort. And that's where resilience grows, not through perfection, but through gentle repetition. And I think one of the biggest emotional shifts is realising that you don't need everybody to fully approve of you in order to have peace. And that's huge, because many caring people have accidentally linked peace to reassurance outside of themselves. If everyone's okay with me, then I can relax. But that creates emotional weariness, because somebody will always misunderstand something eventually. So the goal is not make sure everybody feels never uncomfortable. The goal is remain connected to yourself, even when discomfort exists, because that's emotional strength. And it's also self-trust and inner steadiness, and that changes everything. So if you recognise yourself in today's video, please know this: you're not weak, you're not too sensitive. Very often over-explaining develops because you care deeply, because you want harmony, because you want people to feel okay. But your kindness doesn't come at the expense of your own peace. You are allowed to have boundaries, to say no, to change your mind, to rest, and to choose yourself sometimes, and to speak without writing a full emotional apology afterwards. And the more you begin trusting your own voice, the less tiring life starts to feel. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. You don't need to explain yourself in order to deserve peace. You don't need to justify every decision in order to be a good person. And you don't need everybody else to understand your choices, because you're allowed to trust them yourself. Because sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is not adding another explanation. It's quietly trusting that what you've already said is enough. So if today's video resonated with you in any way, and you feel it may help somebody else too, please consider subscribing if you haven't already, sharing, or leaving a comment below. And I'd really love to know, do you recognise over-explaining in yourself? And if you do, what situations trigger it the most? I'm Dave, and you've been watching Dave's Minecraft. Thank you for being here, and please take good and kind care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.